In our headlines at this hour, Russia is cutting its shipments of gas to Poland and Bulgaria starting this Wednesday, while Vladimir Putin addressed the situation at the Azovstal plant in Mariupol with the head of the UN in Moscow. South Korea's consumer sentiment remains positive for the second straight month in April, but inflation prospects hit a 9-year high amid a host of internal and external factors. Meanwhile, North Korea has pledged to push ahead with its nuclear ambitions, vowing to quicken the pace of development. The US, for its part, has maintained hopes for a nuclear-free peninsula. It's good to have you tuned in. You're watching the Daily Report for Wednesday, April 27th here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. Presidential Transition Committee Chairman An Chol-soo says the incoming Yoon administration will decide on the fate of outdoor mask requirements in late May. On Wednesday, An, who also sits as the chair for the COVID-19 response division at the committee, shared the incoming government's 100-day pandemic plan. He added that a new COVID-19 response strategy will be ready by August, ahead of a projected rebound in COVID-19 cases starting late autumn. The new system will introduce social distancing measures that do not classify businesses based on types, but on the level of exposure to infections in general. The new administration will reportedly place priority on transparency and on establishing a big data platform to monitor the situation based on science, and also spoke of a large-scale antibody testing to better assess the prevalence of infection nationwide. Korean consumers believe inflation will continue to hover high, but their overall economic prospects remain positive amid the easing of pandemic restrictions. Our Lee Si-hoo has details.
South Korean consumers are anticipating a further inflation surge. That outlook is based on research conducted by the Bank of Korea on 2,500 households in the country. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that April's expected inflation rate stood at 3.1%, up 0.2% compared to the previous month. That's the highest it has been since April of 2013. The central bank attributed the rise to soaring consumer and producer prices and the supply disruption caused by the ongoing war in Ukraine. But consumers are apparently optimistic about the economy for a second month in a row with the lifting of social distancing rules. The central bank also said that its composite consumer sentiment index in April stood at 103.8, increasing 0.6% month-on-month. A reading above 100 means that there is more optimism regarding the economy. Experts say it is likely that the trend will continue to rise.
With the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions, the spending sentiment that had previously shrunk will be revived. It's unclear whether a new COVID-19 variant will emerge or not, but for now, it's expected that the composite consumer sentiment index will rise more and more.
As for real estate, the housing price index rose 10 points from the previous month to 114 as more people anticipate increase in property prices. Also, the interest rate index climbed 5 points from the previous month as more people predict the rate to go up in the coming months. Concerns over inflation and interest rates have contributed to the rise as the new BOK governor, Lee Chang-yong, hinted continued interest rate raise to tame high inflation. The Bank of Korea earlier this month hiked its key interest rate to 1.5%, marking the fourth rate raise since a record of 0.5% in 2020. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Korea recorded more losses of lives than birth in the month of February. Statistics Korea on Wednesday said there had been slightly over 20,000 births in February, a 3% decline on year. The number of deaths, however, surged to almost 30,000, marking a jump of more than 22%. Also, the number of marriages went up while divorces moved down. There was a 2% rise in newlyweds in February and an 8% decline in legal separations. Incheon International Airport is gearing up for an influx of travelers as COVID-19 restrictions have been eased to allow for a tangible transition into a new normal across borders. Our Min Soo-kyun has more on those scenes.
Check-in counters at Incheon International Airport are packed with travelers. The hustle and bustle at security checkpoints and departure gates is something that hasn't been usual for the past couple of years in the wake of the pandemic. With most COVID-19 measures now lifted, many are excited to travel.
For 2 years, I only had video calls with my family since we couldn't meet. It was very disappointing. I hope we have more opportunities to travel overseas.
The airline sector has been one of the industries hardest hit by the pandemic. Data shows that the annual number of passengers using Incheon Airport that once topped 70 million in 2019 dropped to less than 12 million in 2020. And last year, the figure plunged deeper to 3.1 million. But starting this year, Incheon Airport is seeking to expand operations in line with the government's efforts to return to pre-pandemic life. It plans to expand the operation of airport limousine buses and have stores resume businesses at airports. Also, major South Korean airlines are looking to increase the number of their flights, with Korean Air flying up to 11 times a week on 8 routes and Asiana Airlines up to 18 times a week on 9 routes starting May.
As it has been difficult to travel abroad for more than 2 years, demand for overseas travel is expected to increase significantly from July to August during the usual peak season.
By the end of the year, the average number of travelers per day is expected to hit 150,000. That's about 80% of the daily average in 2019. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
North Korea's elaborate displays of military strength Monday night were accompanied by equally defined rhetoric by Kim Jong-un about his nuclear ambitions. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Han Sung-woo reports.
To mark the 90th founding anniversary of the regime's People's Revolutionary Army, North Korea revealed some of its new weaponry at Monday night's military parade in Pyongyang, including its Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missile, which it claims to have successfully test-fired last month.
North Korea previously emphasized it had successfully test-fired the Hwasong-17 when it actually fired a different missile on March 24th. It's basically an act of deceiving the public, pretending to have launched the Hwasong-17 to maintain internal unity.
Also seen in recorded footage released by the North State media on Tuesday was what appears to be a new submarine-launched ballistic missile that is slightly longer than the Pukguksong-5, along with a mini SLBM that the regime said it launched last October. Hypersonic missiles and new tactical guided weapons were reportedly on show as well. Dressed in a white emperor-style suit reminiscent of his grandfather and regime founder Kim Il-sung, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un attended the event with his wife Lee Seol-ju and closest aides at his side. He delivered a speech vowing to continue developing North Korea's nuclear program at the fastest rate possible and threatened to use nuclear weapons if what he called the North's fundamental national interests come under threat. Something experts note is a change from previous policies.
It seems North Korea has now expanded the conditions it has for using nuclear weapons to include other things that threaten its interests, such as sanctions.
Kim Jong-un said that although the North's nuclear weapons are fundamentally for deterring war, their use cannot be restricted to that purpose if it puts the regime in what he referred to as an unfavorable situation, leading experts to believe the leader may be leaving open the possibility of preemptive use of nuclear force in the future. In response to the parade, South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's transition team on Tuesday called the North's weapons a real and serious threat and said the incoming administration will strengthen South Korea's alliance with the United States while moving quickly to boost its defense capabilities against the regime's military threats. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
And the UN has also responded to North Korea's nuclear intentions. Responding to media question about the UN stance on Pyongyang's defiant pursuit of nuclear power, the deputy spokesperson for the UN Secretary General called on the regime to return to talks to ensure a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. Likewise, the US State Department has reiterated calls for dialogue with North Korea, adding that Washington harbors no hostility toward Pyongyang while reaffirming the US's goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. President Moon Jae-in, meanwhile, has reiterated hopes for dialogue between Seoul and Pyongyang in efforts to address issues on the Korean Peninsula. Our Yoon has more on his latest remarks.
President Moon Jae-in has urged both the incoming government and North Korea to make efforts to return to dialogue. In a farewell interview with local broadcaster JTBC on Tuesday, he refrained from making a comment on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un because he said it was not a proper time to make an assessment, given that Pyongyang has resumed intercontinental ballistic missile tests.
나는 이제 새 정부가 당연히 대화를 복원하기 위한 노력을 미국과의 긴밀한 공조 속에서 해 나가야 한다고 생각하고 북한도 빨리 대화의 장으로 돌아와야 한다고 생각합니다. 북한이 대화라는 합리적인 선택을 해주기를 바라는 것이고.
Though there wasn't further progress on nuclear talks with North Korea, he said it was true that his government has switched to a dialogue atmosphere from when North Korea was increasing threats in 2017. Regarding the Inter-Korean Summit in 2018, Moon said the regime wanted a security guarantee and the easing of sanctions for denuclearization, and Kim Jong-un wanted to resolve the U.S. distrust of the North. Moon says Seoul had to play a bridging role between North Korea and the U.S. for the summit, as they both wanted to relay a message to each other through South Korea. When asked about former U.S. President Donald Trump, President Moon said he thinks highly of him for his efforts for talks, despite there not being that much support within the U.S. for a summit with Kim.
그런 것을 무릅쓰고 또 아까 말한 실무적인 어떤 합의 과정 같은 거 없이 톱다운 방식으로 북한의 김정은 위원장을 직접 만나서 설득을 해보겠다.
Regarding his proposal of an end-of-war declaration, Moon said Seoul and Washington have coordinated on the issue, but there's a long way to go. He criticized those who argue that Seoul should possess nuclear weapons and said he is concerned about nuclear proliferation in Northeast Asia. On the Seoul-Tokyo relationship, the president said the problem occurred as Japan has turned to the right during the Abe administration. He refrained from making a comment on the former Japanese Prime Minister's leadership, though he said personally Abe was a polite person. Regarding the relationship with China, President Moon called for practical diplomacy, maintaining a harmonious relationship with Beijing based on the strong Seoul-Washington alliance. He added South Korea should not be asked to make a choice between them. Yoon, Arirang News.
Japanese Prime Minister Kishida has reportedly stressed the need to improve ties between Seoul and Tokyo. Now, the remarks were made earlier on Tuesday, that is, during talks with the South Korean delegation currently in Tokyo on behalf of the incoming Yoon administration. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's delegation to Japan says Japanese Prime Minister Kishida is on the same page as Yoon in repairing the bilateral relationship, which is at its lowest point in years. On Tuesday, the delegation led by lawmaker Chung Jin-seok met with Prime Minister Kishida for around half an hour and delivered Yoon's vision on relations with Japan as well as a personal letter to Kishida. According to the Japan Times, during the meeting, Kishida said that with the rules-based international order threatened, strategic cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo, as well as a trilateral relationship including the U.S., is more necessary than ever. The comments were made when referring to the recent series of missile tests done by North Korea and the war in Ukraine, adding there's no time to spare. Kishida also briefly addressed the core issue of the current low point in the two's relationship, history, saying that the ongoing issues over wartime forced labor, among other things, need to be resolved. Yoon's delegation said that the incoming administration is aware of the weight of the situation and that they will make diplomatic efforts to please all parties. Also, the delegation said the two agreed to create more opportunities to expand civilian exchanges between the two countries in order to regain trust. Jong and his team also met with travel and airline companies the day before, highlighting the need to resume direct flights between Seoul and Haneda Airport near Tokyo, as well as lifting mandatory quarantine when traveling between the two countries. As for the invitation to Yoon's inauguration ceremony in May, when asked by reporters, Chung said it's not a conventional method diplomatically to invite a head of state. Instead, Kishida would have to show his interest first. No specifics were talked about, but if Kishida does want to attend, the incoming administration will be prepared to welcome him. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has congratulated French President Emmanuel Macron on his re-election during talks with French Ambassador to South Korea, Philippe Lefort. Earlier on this Wednesday, Yoon met Lefort to discuss bilateral relations and future collaboration under his administration starting in May. Also this afternoon, Yoon is meeting with the founder of U.S. conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, Edwin Filner, followed by Professor Klaus Schwab, who is the founder and current chairman of the World Economic Forum. Authorities have lowered the infectious disease level of COVID-19 to Class 2, and all restrictions, with the exception of the mask mandate, have been lifted. The task now is to ensure that members of the public will seek to make informed decisions to allow for a new normal amid COVID-19. For more, I have Professor Kim Moon-kyu from Yonsei University. Professor Kim, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur, Korea. Dr. Kim, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good afternoon.
Right, Professor Kim, the number of patients in critical care stands at the 546 level, and we've lost 141 lives on this Wednesday. What are your thoughts first on these tallies?
It's declining, and if we compare with the daily tally, I usually watch the 7-day average of those numbers, the death tolls and the daily tally. And I think we are getting out of Omicron slowly, and I hope that's going to be the end of this pandemic. But that's the price we pay. People die, and a lot of funds we have to use. Those 7-day average of death toll peaked in March 24th, and it's already declining. And it's about 7 days after the daily tally, and now it's about 7 cases of mortality per million. And when it was in Delta, it was less than right now because there were fewer cases. But if you look at the case fatality rate, it's only 10 times less in Omicron outbreaks. So I think if we had an outbreak like this with Delta variant, we should have a very hard time. But luckily, we are now in Omicron, so that's the reason the mortality is less, and it's going to decline. I think it looks like it's going into a lull for a time being, and now we have to be vigilant for possible new variant emerging.
Right. And Dr. Kim, starting this past Monday, eating and drinking at movie theatres and indoor sports stadiums are allowed. Now, some have questioned the logic of mandating masks within classrooms and work environments while permitting their removal to consume food within confined spaces. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, apparently those decisions seem very inconsistent because those, I mean, the place you're talking about is the same, some indoor environment. Obviously, compared to some outdoor environment, well, as long as we just keep at least 2 meters of distance just between people in outdoors, well, we can actually just lift up the mandate, I mean, just mask mandate. But indoors, especially some closed space, the transmission, the chance of transmission is just higher compared to others. But then I'm just trying to understand this kind of just the way to just returning to our just normal life. But somehow just the decision cannot be, somehow has to be like a step by step, not just all of a sudden just to release all the mask mandate. So My guess is, I don't know exactly what happened, but my guess is probably just the government will try some places first of all, and then just seeing some trend of transmission, the things like that, then just move on to some next step. That's what I understand.
Right. Professor Kim, also starting this week, authorities have downgraded the 4-tier infectious disease level of COVID-19 to Class 2 from Class 1. What changes are we looking at under this new classification?
Well, the Class 1 diseases are very severe and quite rare in Korea. It's like Ebola, SARS, MERS, and diphtheria. We don't have it right now. And some pest and some disease like Lassa, we don't have it in Korea. And if this COVID-19 is that severe, we might have to continue that disease belonging to Class 1. But I think it's time we go to move that disease to Class 2. For disease belonging to Class 1, we did a very strict epidemiologic studies, and most of the disease should be, patients should be kept in negative pressure room, to prevent spreading. And the portion of the self-pay is different. I mean, a patient is all covered if you belong to Class 1, but if you belong to Class 2 disease, more portion you have to pay. It's not covered by the government. So before 2 years, at the beginning of this pandemic, we didn't know much about this COVID-19. So that was the reason we had to put it in a Class 1. I think it's possible that we can change it to Class 2, but ICU and emergency department might have to keep more stricter rules than other Class 2 diseases for COVID-19.
I see. And just to have a better understanding, which diseases are currently classified as Class 2?
Class 2, tuberculosis, measles, chickenpox, and typhoid fever, and some disease like that, hepatitis A. Those diseases we can meet sometimes in Korea, and now I think Omicron is becoming one of them.
Right, I see. And Dr. Kim, starting April 30th until May 22nd, visits to nursing homes will be allowed as Korea celebrates a number of family-oriented holidays in May, including Parents' Day and Children's Day. Having said that, what precautions do you advise to ensure a safe reunion at nursing homes?
Well, it was a little bit just tragic because especially just some older parents should stay at the nursing homes without just meeting any family members. Actually, not just in addition to the some COVID-19, that those people are actually suffering from some of psychological problems such as the depression, things like kind of just isolate from the society and just confined with some limited some building. So then I think just to alleviate such kind of the psychological issues, I think now is the time to just give a chance of just a family reunion. Now just we are just observing the some end of the end of the some Omicron wave. But then before doing that, we need to just keep in mind some several things. The first one is whether we are just immune to the infection. That's the first line. So whether when I saying just immune is whether it actually just whether we are actually protected by our vaccination or just naturally just the infection by natural immunity. So that's the first line. But we have to also keep in mind that that immunity actually does not last forever. Some are mostly just neutralizing antibody just waning after a couple a month later. Although our cellular immunity conferred by the T cells just stays very long time, just at least after 6 months after vaccination or just infection. And then so that's very number one important. And then in that case, we also need some another layer of just protection just in case, which is actually just wearing mask. Just wearing mask, our old parents and also just some visiting family members. That's an additional layer of protection just in case. So if we just keep those guidelines, I think we can have a very safe family reunion.
Right, hopefully. Professor Kim, we are now ushering in the season of spring, and as beautiful as the flowers are, those who suffer from pollen allergy are quite anxious. That being said, how can we distinguish these allergy symptoms from those of COVID-19?
Well, I can say that it's distinct from each other, and I would like to explain some characteristics of allergic rhinitis and asthma. For allergic rhinitis, you have repeated sneezing and nasal obstruction and itching sensation of nose and sometimes eyes. Usually they don't have fever, so they know their symptoms, most of the allergic patients. So allergic rhinitis is quite easy to distinguish from COVID-19. For patients with asthma, I think there are some common symptoms and some different symptoms. The symptoms in common are coughing and shortness of breathing if you get severe COVID-19. But if you look at typical symptoms of asthma, they usually have a wheezing and they have a rapid breathing. And they usually don't have fever. But patients with COVID-19 have fever, sore throat, and runny nose, and some body pain. So I think those symptoms are quite distinct. And allergic patients usually, understands what is asthmatic allergic symptom and what is not. So I think fever will be the number one symptom, which is quite different.
Right, and then of course you need to get tested for that.
Yep.
Dr. Kim, health authorities have spoken about the importance of securing more COVID-19 treatment pills as Korea seeks an exit strategy from this pandemic. That being said, what can you tell us about our own efforts here in the country to develop a homegrown treatment against COVID-19?
Well, first of all, I think we have to have the two different weapons. One is the vaccine, and the other one is the antiviral drug. For the vaccines, now we have just more than just the vaccines that we have right now. So sometimes we are just thinking about maybe donating or sharing our surplus vaccines with the other countries. But for the drugs, that's still we are actually just experiencing a little bit of the supply issues. So for that, I think the government is trying to get actually secure more drugs, especially Paxlovid, and also thinking about some Evusheld, which is actually some monoclonal antibodies, but not actually treatment purposes. So this is usually used for some preventive purpose, especially for those who are actually immunocompromised, so that even after their vaccination, they cannot elicit a very full immunity against the COVID-19 infection. And other than that, for our domestic efforts for the drug development, the domestic pharmaceutical company actually collaborating with the Japanese pharmaceutical company and trying some clinical trials, phase 2 and the phase 3 clinical trials. Those drugs seems pretty promising, and then the mechanism of action of those drugs is actually really similar to the Paxlovid. But then this drug seems to have a more longer shelf life. Which means that longer lasting compared to the Paxlovid, and it seems to work without the ritonavir, which is actually one of the combination drug when we actually use the Paxlovid. Actually, Paxlovid is a combination drug. One of them is the normalizing. This is a new drug with some ritonavir. This is an old drug that was originally developed for the AIDS patient. So this is a combination. And then another company, the Incheon, is also developing some more advanced neutralizing monoclonal antibody. Their first development was actually effective until against the Delta variant. But after the emergence of the Omicron and the stealth Omicron, somehow they are like other major the monoclonal antibody. It lost a lot of substantial neutralization capacity. So now they are trying to find out another the monoclonal antibody candidate they actually identified earlier in the pandemic. So then they're trying now phase 2 and the phase 3 clinical trials. And then so others for a global scale. I know the remdesivir, although it is very effective, somehow this was an injection drug. So it was not really very beneficial way to the patient with some mild COVID-19. But now remdesivir is actually, the companies are developing orally bioavailable remdesivir. bear, and then they finished some animal study, and the result was pretty successful. And then as far as remember, I can tell they are trying some clinical trials with some people, and also some Merck is also just trying to upgrade the molnupiravir as some second generation drug. And then I think although just the first the development was the clinical efficacy was a little bit disappointing, I think I hope that after this second generation drug, they hope they get some better just efficacy. And then the government is also supporting just a lot of just drug development in terms of the national R&D programs right now.
Right, to boost our arsenal against COVID-19.
Sure.
Professor Kim, speculation is quite high about a rebound in late autumn, that is. Do you share this view?
Well, everything is possible. And if there's no prominent variant emerging, I think there will be the best scenario for Koreans, because more than 60–70% of our population might be immune against Omicron. And if you don't have a new variant emerging, that means we have some kind of herd immunity. So only the person who are not vaccinated or people with underlying condition might have to be cautious about their health. But we have to remember there are some blind spots when you look at our world map, especially in Africa and some areas like refugee camps in conflict zones or war zones. Usually the health system is all collapsed, so those areas might have another possible outbreak spots. Well, the more virus have a chance to replicate, there are more chance new mutants might emerge. So globally thinking, if there's an area that this COVID-19 is not properly treated, especially in a patient with immune-compromised situation, then the virus can replicate for quite a long time. And the long time means possibility for a new variant to emerge. If we compare Delta variant and Omicron variant, Omicron didn't came out of Delta. That means Delta emerged from some area, Omicron emerged from other area in Africa. So if there's a patient is continuing the disease of COVID-19 and the virus replicating, that situation is no good. I mean, he might have another, make another mutation. So every patient should be treated properly in a short time. And also, we are in spring and going into summer, but the southern hemisphere is in the opposite way. So our autumn is in September, October, November, but a new variant can emerge from the southern hemisphere. So, and we travel, so that's the reason autumn, not only autumn is some time we have to be cautious. Every time around the world, around the year, we should be vigilant. And as summer comes, we're going to use a air conditioning system. And you have to remember that this coronavirus can be spread in those confined spaces with air conditioning system. So I would like to quote a slogan from COVAX, which is the organization trying to keep the equity of this vaccination spread. With a fast-moving pandemic, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So I wish that we can think domestically and also globally. So autumn is a point that we have to think domestically, but globally, I think we have to be vigilant around the year.
Right, of course. And given the concerns raised by Professor Kim, Dr. Kim, what are your thoughts on perhaps efforts to better respond to a possible resurgence in the autumn?
Well, not just in autumn, but recently there is some report from the U.S. that new Omicron subvariant are emerging, and then the number of just the infection, just the total number of just infection actually now just over than those of the Delta wave. And then thus those the variant is specifically named as BA.2.12.1, and well, just the emergence of just this new variant is, I would say, it's inevitable. And then earlier in the pandemic, and most of the WHO and then our just government officials said now we cannot go back to our pre-pandemic normal, and then somehow we have to just get used to living with the COVID-19. And then for the emerging variant, well, the actually best weapon you can just use is still just the vaccination. And then so one of the actually very recent just example showing that why the vaccination is so important is that it's the case of the Omicron. Some people say that, well, Omicron is very just causing very mild disease. Sometimes the people say this is Omicron, but then when we actually look at the cases in Hong Kong, many people are actually not vaccinated, and then the case numbers were just so high, and also the case fatality was so high. So when we actually just somehow ignore some danger of this Omicron, and then also neglecting the vaccination effect, we can also experience the very same thing. So there's still just vaccination very important, even after many just variants so far. Our just original vaccines are demonstrating that it's very just highly just effective against especially preventing the progression to severe disease and then hospitalization. So that's very important, and also just securing just just a supply of just the oral just antivirals.
Right, vaccination and treatment pills then.
Sure.
All right, Dr. Kim, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts, and Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Russia is raising the stakes in its standoff with Europe over its invasion of Ukraine. It has announced plans to halt shipments, gas shipments that would be, to Poland and Bulgaria starting this Wednesday. Our Kim Yo-san reports.
Poland's government has been told that the country's gas supply from Russia will stop from Wednesday. The decision comes on the heels of Poland's announcement on Tuesday that it was imposing sanctions on 50 entities and individuals, including Russia's largest gas company, over Moscow's ongoing military aggression in Ukraine. It also follows Poland's refusal to pay for gas in Russian rubles, which Russia had demanded. Following the news, Polish authorities say the country's energy supplies were secure.
Our gas storages are 76% full. This is a high level, much higher than in most European countries. Therefore, also in this transitional period before the Baltic gas pipeline is launched, we will be able to draw on our resources as well as obtain gas from all other possible directions.
Bulgaria was also told that gas deliveries from Russia's Gazprom would be halted. As the country relies on the Russian energy giant for over 90% of its gas supply, Bulgaria's energy ministry says it has begun steps to find alternative sources. Meanwhile, hosting over 40 countries, including South Korea, Australia, and Israel, for defense talks in Germany on Tuesday, Washington stressed that the coming weeks would be, quote, critical.
So we've got to move at the speed of war. And I know that all the leaders leave today more resolved than ever to support Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression and atrocities.
The Pentagon chief also welcomed Berlin's decision to send heavy weaponry to Ukraine for the first time. Against this backdrop, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged for a ceasefire during his visit to Moscow while he sat down with Russian President Vladimir Putin. During the meeting, Putin said he hopes for a diplomatic agreement, while the UN chief reiterated calls for aid and the setting up of an evacuation corridor to help Ukrainians. These developments come as Ukrainian officials say they are concerned by attempts to worsen the security situation in Moldova's pro-Russian breakaway region. They also added that Russian forces are trying to surround Ukrainian defensive lines in the east as they intensify attacks in the region. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In neighboring Beijing, residents there are stockpiling food and other essentials amid rampant concerns of a lockdown following reports of COVID-19 cases in recent days. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the latest.
Beijing residents are panic buying food and medical supplies as fears mount that a Shanghai-style citywide lockdown could be imposed on the Chinese capital. Beijing reported 19 new coronavirus infections on Monday, which is low by global standards, but could still trigger further measures, including lockdowns, in line with China's commitment to its zero-COVID policy. It would depend on the results of mass virus testing in its largest district of Chaoyang, of 3.5 million residents and workers who have been ordered to take tests 3 times this week. Already more than a dozen residential buildings were put under a lockdown in Chaoyang, an affluent downtown area home to embassies and international businesses.
What happened in Shanghai is understandable. That's such a big city. Even though the government made great efforts, there must have been something that was less than satisfactory. It's okay as long as they made corrections.
Shanghai has seen more than 400,000 COVID-19 cases since late March, resulting nearly 140 deaths. Residents in China's most populous city have took to social media to vent their discontent as they suffer from major food shortages and delivery delays as the city's lockdowns enter their 4th week. In Beijing, photos and videos across social media showed empty shelves at some stores as shoppers appeared to ignore assurances that the city would not suffer the same fate as Shanghai. Some of the draconian lockdown measures in Shanghai include placing electronic door alarms, forcefully evacuating people from homes to carry out disinfection procedures, and setting up green barricades outside homes without prior warning. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Back here on the local front, reservations for those wishing to tour the Blue House from next month start today, that is Wednesday. According to the Presidential Transition Committee, bookings can be made on online platforms including Naver, KakaoTalk and TOS. Visitors can choose the date and time slot but must book at least 9 days ahead of the tour. Following the relocation of the presidential office and President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's pledge to open the Blue House to the public, people will be able to visit from noon on May 10th. The Blue House will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and as many as 6,500 people can enter in each 2-hour time slot. Executives of major entertainment agencies in South Korea have been listed among Billboard's 2022 International Power Players. Now, 4 executives were named in the Billboard list of leaders in the global music markets outside the U.S. They include SM Entertainment co-CEOs Lee Sung-soo and Park Young-jun, HYBE CEO Park Ji-won, and Shin Young-jae, president of Big Hit Music. Now, Billboard cited SM's metaverse strategy as the reason behind the selection, saying that virtual avatars of the company's girl group aespa drew attention and contributed to SM's achievements. Regarding HYBE's CEO, Billboard said he led innovation in the music industry by successfully rebranding the company from Big Hit Entertainment. The role of modern libraries goes beyond that of quiet places for reading or studying. These treasure troves of information now also offer space for comfort and creativity. Our Yoon shows us how.
Not all libraries are a place of silence. This library has a studio where students can play music, far from the usual homeschool academy routine.
I come to this library to rest and do what I want rather than studying.
This is the place to come when I want to clear my mind. It's relaxing.
This library also attracts students who want space to practice their talent in craft making. This is another unique library that's nestled deep in a forest along a hiking trail. It's a space exclusively for poetry. Hikers become fans of poetry, and poets get to appreciate nature.
I come here often because I feel like these short pieces of writing purify my heart.
This library also teaches poetry writing. And for aspiring poets, there's a program that rents space for them to write in, where instead of paying rent, poets are required to submit one piece of poetry every month.
I hope for more writers, publishers, libraries and bookstores, people that read books, book clubs. Such an ecosystem would make a better city.
As libraries continue to move away from being places of silence, they're becoming places of healing for all age groups and places for people to focus on their dreams and goals. 이은진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Pakistan, 3 Chinese teachers and a Pakistani national were killed in a bomb blast on Tuesday. Officials confirmed that the victims were returning to Karachi University by minibus when a bomb exploded in the vehicle near the entrance of the campus Chinese Language and Cultural Center. The separatist group, the Baluch Liberation Army, has claimed responsibility, saying the attack was carried out by a female suicide bomber. Photos of the reported bomber were shared by the group but haven't yet been verified by authorities. The group is known to oppose Chinese investment in Pakistan, claiming that locals don't benefit. China has reported the first human infection of the H3N8 bird flu. It had previously been detected only in horses, dogs, birds and seals. Health authorities on Tuesday said the risk of spread is low and that the bird flu strain did not yet have the ability to effectively infect humans. A 4-year-old boy was confirmed with the flu after developing symptoms on April 5th. Health officials said he had been in contact with chickens and crows. Close contacts of the boy have reportedly not been infected. China sees occasional infections of bird flu in people, usually in the poultry industry, as the country has various strains of the virus. The UN is calling for urgent action to avoid a sand crisis, as consumption has overtaken natural replenishment. In a report on Tuesday, it said demand for sand has soared to 50 billion tons a year, following global population growth and urbanization. It added that after water, sand is the second most exploited natural resource and is only replaced by geological processes that take hundreds of thousands of years. The resource is mainly used for glass, concrete and construction materials, with figures putting global use at 17 kilograms per person per day. The increase in sand harvesting is damaging beaches, reversing river flows and wiping out small islands. The UN has recommended reusing sand from recycled materials and has proposed a ban on mining sand from beaches. Football clubs Borussia Dortmund and Dynamo Kyiv have helped raise $420,000 in support of victims of the war in Ukraine. Meeting for a friendly match at the Signal Iduna Park on Tuesday, the 2 teams played in front of a crowd of 35,000 spectators. Ultimately, Dynamo defeated Dortmund 3-2 in the 4th match of their Match for Peace tour. The Ukrainian club are currently going around Europe playing games to raise funds for victims of the Ukraine war. Dynamo arrived in Germany having already beaten Legia Warsaw and Galatasaray, as well as drawing with Cluj of Romania. A pair of death-defying pilots managed to partially succeed in completing the first ever mid-air plane swap. Taking to the skies above Arizona on Sunday, cousins Luke Aikens and Andy Farrington flew their Cessna 182s to an altitude of 4,200 meters. They then put their planes into a controlled nosedive, jumped out, and each attempted to take control of the other's aircraft. Although Aikens successfully swapped planes, Farrington needed to abort and parachuted to safety. Nobody was harmed in the incident. However, the Federal Aviation Administration has said they are conducting an investigation. Organizers allegedly defied a government order that requires people operating planes to remain in the aircraft and wear seatbelts. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Wednesday afternoon. After the rain ceased yesterday, a cold northerly wind began blowing into the country, causing temperatures to dip nearly 20 degrees in Seoul. So it might have felt cooler than it actually was. So highs in central areas are set to return to normal again, slightly above 20 degrees, while highs in southern areas are warmer than yesterday. But anyway, we're not seeing unusually high temperatures for the time being. And we have a regular but unwelcome spring guest, yellow dust. And that's the first case to be monitored so far this year. Last time I checked, well, there was a fine dust alert centered in and around the metropolitan area. And I hope that things improve later today, but that region will likely be affected by yellow dust all day long. Well, throughout this week, wide gaps should continue, and another round of spring showers is in the forecast on Friday. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
That is all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Report. Do join us again same time tomorrow. Thank you for now.